When I pulled up outside my sister's house at the quiet corner of her tree-lined street, I felt the familiar comfort that always greeted me there, like the walls themselves remembered who I used to be before life became complicated. She hugged me tightly the moment she opened the door, laughing about how long it had been. And for the first day or two, everything felt simple, warm, predictable. Then I properly noticed Liam. I had heard that her close friend, son, was staying there temporarily after finishing his Master's degree. But in my mind, he was still the lanky boy I'd met briefly years ago. The man who stood in the kitchen that afternoon, sleeves rolled casually, offering to carry my suitcase upstairs, was someone entirely different. At 25, he carried himself with an ease that wasn't arrogant but quietly assured, his voice steady, his smile thoughtful rather than careless. There was something observant about him, as if he paid attention not just to what people said, but to what they almost said. At first, our conversations were harmless, polite questions about work, about travel, about how long I was staying, but somehow those small exchanges stretched into longer ones. We found ourselves sitting on the porch after dinner while my sister turned in early, talking about places he had traveled. The tiny coastal towns he'd wandered through in Spain. The elderly bookstore owner in Prague who'd changed his perspective on failure. The absurd afternoon he once spent lost in a narrow Italian alleyway arguing with a street vendor who didn't speak a word of English. I hadn't laughed like that in months, maybe longer, and when I finally wiped tears from my eyes, I caught him watching me, not boldly, but with a softness that felt dangerously personal. "I'm glad you're here," he said, and something inside me shifted in a way I didn't want to name. I told myself it was only appreciation, the natural warmth of being seen after a long season of feeling invisible in my own life. But the days that followed made it harder to dismiss. He began leaving my coffee exactly the way I liked it, strong, with just a hint of milk, without ever asking how I took it. If I dozed off on the sofa with a book slipping from my hand, I would wake to find a blanket carefully draped over me. Once, while I was struggling with a stubborn jar lid in the kitchen, he stepped close behind me to help. His arm reached around mine, his hand covering the lid, and when his fingers brushed my knuckles, the contact was fleeting, yet electric, freezing me mid-breath. He twisted the jar open effortlessly and stepped back as if nothing unusual had happened, but my pulse refused to return to normal. That night I lay awake replaying every small detail, scolding myself for romanticizing kindness, reminding myself that he was practically family, that I was older, that there were lines decent people didn't blur. Still, when we sat outside the next evening, with the air thick from an approaching storm, and he handed me a cup of tea with a quiet "You seem far away tonight," I felt exposed in a way that was both unsettling and comforting. I wanted to confess the confusion growing inside me, the way his nearness both steadied and unraveled me, yet I swallowed it down and pretended calm. The tension threaded through everything after that. At breakfast, sunlight pooled across the table as he studied me over the rim of his mug, commenting gently on how quiet I'd become. In the kitchen later, while helping him prepare dinner, we moved around each other in an almost choreographed rhythm, passing knives, bumping shoulders, laughing when we reached for the same cutting board. When our hands collided and lingered a second too long, neither of us immediately pulled away. The air thickened with an awareness that couldn't be undone. That night, a storm cracked open the sky and we ended up on the sofa watching a movie we barely paid attention to. Thunder rattled the windows and instinctively I wrapped the blanket tighter around myself. Without asking, he shifted closer and placed his arm lightly across my shoulders. It was an innocent gesture on the surface, the kind born from shared comfort during bad weather. But the slow, absent circles his thumb traced along my arm sent warmth spiraling through me. I should have moved. I didn't. Instead, I leaned the slightest bit into him, telling myself it was harmless, that proximity didn't equal betrayal. The following day, guilt settled in, sharp and unwelcome. I kept to the upstairs room, answering emails that didn't require answering, pretending busyness. When he finally called me down for lunch, there was no accusation in his voice, only quiet understanding. "You're avoiding me," he said gently once we were alone. I tried to deny it, but the words tangled. He looked at me in that steady way of his and said, "You don't have to explain." Yet the truth was I barely understood what I would be explaining. That evening the power went out as another storm rolled through, plunging the house into darkness. He lit candles, their glow softening the edges of his face as we sat across from each other at the table. The silence between us felt less like absence and more like a decision waiting to be made. "You've been on my mind," he admitted finally, his voice lower than usual, as if afraid sound itself might tip us over a cliff. My heart hammered so loudly I was certain he could hear it. I knew that this was the moment to step back, to laugh it off, to reinforce boundaries with clarity. Instead, I held his gaze and whispered that he hadn't been alone in that feeling. The confession hung fragile in the candlelight. He exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand across his jaw. "This isn't something that ends well," he said, more to himself than to me. "I don't want either of us carrying regret." His restraint struck me harder than any reckless declaration could have. We both understood the unspoken complications, the closeness of families, age difference, the emotional vulnerability that had made this connection bloom too quickly. So I said what responsibility demanded that I would cut my visit short. The words felt like tearing fabric. The morning I left, the house was quiet, almost solemn. I wrote him a note at the kitchen counter because speaking face-to-face would have undone me. I told him I didn't fully understand what had grown between us, only that it was real enough to matter and dangerous enough to leave untouched. I thanked him for reminding me that I could still feel deeply, that parts of me I thought had dulled were still alive. By the time I reached the end of the street, my phone rang. His name glowing on the screen made my chest tighten. He had read the note. His voice carried a tenderness edged with resolve. He said he felt it too, that I wasn't imagining the pull, but that caring sometimes meant stepping away before something beautiful twisted into something painful. Tears blurred the road ahead as I told him I understood. We didn't promise anything reckless, only that respect would outlast temptation. In the weeks after returning home, ordinary routines felt subtly altered. I would pause while making coffee, remembering how effortlessly he had learned my preferences. I'd catch myself smiling at nothing, recalling the way he listened, as though my thoughts were treasures rather than trivialities. What lingered wasn't the physical closeness, but the recognition, the rare experience of being seen without pretense. I didn't know what the future holds, or whether our paths will cross again in some safer season of life. But I know this: not every connection is meant to be pursued to its limit. Some arrive quietly, awaken something dormant, and then ask for courage in letting go. What we shared never crossed into something irreparable, yet it changed me all the same, leaving behind a gentle ache and the understanding that even restrained love can leave a lasting imprint.